Hello, and welcome to We Live for Saturday, your favorite college football podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike, and with me tonight is a special guest host whom you may know as a contributor to our Indiana sections on our preseason and postseason. Yep, you see the gear with the preseason and postseason. Our reviews and previews of each team each year. So we have on as a guest host tonight, Dom the Rev.
How's it going, Mike?
It's going great. I'm doing awesome. How are you doing tonight?
Fantastic. It was pumpkin carving night here. We are getting ready for Halloween. It was a blast. My arm is sore. I don't work a little tiny saw that often.
Sure.
And but we're ready to go. The kids picked out a skull and crossbones jack-o'-lantern.
Nice.
So that was intricate.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how do you? That's not just a smile. That's a lot.
No.
It's a lot going into that.
You're dealing with negative space. This is art.
Yeah,
this is art.
That's impressive. I think that's beyond something I could accomplish. Art was never my strong point.
According to the pumpkin carving book that I got it from, it was 3 out of 4 pumpkins. So I'm feeling accomplished tonight.
Wow, that is impressive stuff. Yeah, good work. Well, that's good to hear. It is. I don't know what the weather is like down there. It is fall again. It was 80 yesterday, which was ridiculous. I don't know what's going on, but it was fall again today, and that
low 70s in the Ohio River Valley, and we were shorts today. They say it's gonna rain tomorrow. I hope it holds off for the kids.
Yeah, seriously. Well, it's gonna rain all day and night tomorrow here, apparently. Yeah, I hope it holds off for you so you can get some. That's going to be, you don't want to trick or treat with a poncho on.
We've done it before and we'll do it again. But
sure.
The little guys like it a lot better if they're not soaked by the time we get home. So it'll be good.
At that point, you're really focusing on the candy. When you get wet, you're just thinking about your candy.
Eyes on the prize.
Yes. You gotta be really locked in, So like some of these Big Ten teams, when we get into the dog days of the season here in late October, when everybody is hoping for that second bye to come around. All right. Well, there's no real Big Ten off the field news this week, so I think we're gonna go right into previewing these games.
Let's do this.
So let's preview Week 10 in the Big Ten. Sound good?
I'm in. Let's go.
All right. Well, let's start with arguably the biggest game of the day. We've got the 6-1, number 4 Ohio State Buckeyes going to Happy Valley to take on the 7-0 undefeated number 3 Penn State Nittany Lions. This is an 11 a.m. game on Fox, the big noon game. And the line is Ohio State by 3.5. And I will say off the bat, Zen Mikelski, who played at left tackle in the place of the injured Simmons, he apparently is banged up and is not going to play this weekend. So Ohio State is now on a 3rd left tackle, which we'll get into why that might be significant.
You might see a whole line shuffle at that point.
I mean, you have to almost, don't you? I think you do. All right. So aside from Ohio State and Oregon, this is the biggest game of the year in the Big Ten.
The game of the century of the week.
Yes, it is the game of the century of the week. You're absolutely correct. Both Ohio State and Penn State are ranked in the top 3, or the top 4, excuse me. Both rank in the top 10 in scoring defense. Ohio State at 4 and Penn State at 8. Both teams score a lot. Penn State's averaging 33 points per game, while Ohio State's averaging 40. Both have expectations that this is the year that they break through and meet their respective goals. For Ohio State, that's a national title. For Penn State, it's a Big Ten title and a playoff berth. Although it's worth mentioning, until Penn State loses, you have to consider them national title contenders as well. Both are facing uncertain injury situations to key players. For Penn State, that's QB Drew Aller and whether or not he will play this week. For Ohio State, it's the attrition on the offensive line after, as we said, losing their starting left tackle and now the backup left tackle. So the question is whether they can play better than they did last week in what was a pitiful effort against Nebraska. And this week,
see, that's a good Nebraska team.
It's a good Nebraska team, but
a good Nebraska team.
Yes, it is a good Nebraska team. But Ohio State looked all kinds of out of sorts. And they ran the ball 31 times for 64 yards, I think. Something like that. So that's rough. That worries me a little bit. That's not what we've seen from them for most of the season. This week will be a challenge for both of them. And Tom Allen has this Penn State defense playing fantastic ball. Defensive end Abdul Carter is an absolute wrecking ball who will destroy whatever is in his path, and deny Dennis Sutton on the other side isn't too shabby himself. So in my opinion, stopping Abdul Carter is the number one key for Ohio State this week. If Carter gets loose, he could create sacks and or turnovers, which the Buckeyes cannot afford if they're going to win this game. So Dom, how do you see this one breaking down?
Well, and you're right. With the Penn State pass rush and a shuffled offensive line, you wonder what Ohio State's been able to do. But if you look on balance, these two teams over the course of the year have been pretty similar, right?
Yeah.
Last week, they were both in games late that you would think they didn't have business being in, right? Overtime, the week before with Penn State and USC. Earlier this year, they've played one-score games against teams like Bowling Green, right? Ohio State, on the other hand, until the last couple of weeks, they were blowing everybody out.
Yeah, crushing them.
Right? The closest game until that Oregon game was a 28-point win over Iowa. And so I'm looking at the way they played last week, both teams. Ohio State gets up, Nebraska claws back. Ohio State wins it at the end. Penn State, it's sort of back and forth. You got fluky fake punts, and you got all of these sort of plays by Wisconsin, and then Drew Aller goes out.
Yep.
Now, will he play, won't he play? I don't know.
That's such a big question.
If he doesn't, what's Bo Pribula going to do? He's kind of a different quarterback.
Yes.
He can move around. He can run some.
Absolutely.
In the end, I think Ohio State has more weapons. I think Ohio State has too much of a skill gap over Penn State. Frankly, I think Ohio State's still probably the best team in the country. I know they lost by 1 to Oregon. But on talent, I think Ohio State's the better team here. It's a whiteout in Happy Valley, and anything can happen when that Penn State crowd goes nuts, but it's a noontime kick. I think you lose some whiteout magic with a noontime kick.
Oh, yeah.
As much as I love a noon kick as an Indiana fan, that seemed to be all we ever got. I just don't think Penn State can keep up. Now, they may not have to. If they can cause some havoc on defense, if they can muck the game up, they may not have to keep up.
Right.
But I think Ohio State's the better team. I think it's going to be the Bucks, and I think it's going to be big.
You think it's going to be big? Okay, interesting.
I think it's going to be big. 31-17. That's my score.
Okay.
31-17 Ohio State.
All right. I'm going to get to my score, but I want to talk through a couple of things first. So my first question for you is, will either team be able to run the ball? Because the Buckeyes have struggled of late, especially since losing their left tackle, and nobody's really run the ball against either Ohio State or Penn State all year. It's not like Oregon was going off in the running game, They were throwing the ball downfield. So both teams giving up under 100 yards rushing per game. Yeah. If one of these teams can get the running game going, that could be a deciding factor in this game. And I just wonder, when you bring in Will Howard, they haven't shown any QB run really all year, even against Oregon.
No.
And I wonder now, with your offensive line in flux, in a must-win game against Penn State, is this now where you say, all right, F it, like throw it out the window? We're bringing the kitchen sink, and Will Howard's going to run a bunch of read option, and Penn State's going to have no idea that it's coming.
I mean, he can do it.
We know he can do it.
That was the offense at Kansas State.
Yes. And so the fact that we haven't seen it, I think that would open up things a lot for Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. And
you don't have to block an end if you can read an end.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's the thing about Abdul Carter, because he's pretty much an impossible guy to block on a consistent basis. I mean, he is just ridiculous. So yeah, I think we see new wrinkles from Ohio State this week. I think we see, like I just said, more run game with Will Howard. If you keep him in the pocket all day, I think Will Howard's going to get killed. So I think they have to move the pocket too, and do that more than we've seen them do this year. So just because those Penn State players are you have to scheme away from them and try to keep Will Howard out of trouble that way. So they just have to run it, because Penn State otherwise, I think, is just going to tee off in the pass rush, and eventually they're going to get to Will Howard, and eventually that's going to cause turnovers, whether it's a fumble or an interception or whatever. So I just think Ohio State has to run the ball this week. And
that's what happened against Nebraska.
Yeah.
That's what happened against Nebraska. And if they've learned anything, and this is the question, have they learned anything?
Right.
Or are they going to be stubborn and say, we're just going to do what we do? I think they're too smart. I think they're too good. I already said my score. I think they'll learn.
Yeah.
I think
I'm with you. And I think my focus is on the Ohio State secondary, because safety Lathan Ransom's back this week after missing some time. And Ohio State cornerback Denzel Burke has had his manhood challenged and his ability challenged as like a high draft pick. And I think he's got to come out against very average Penn State wide receivers and be really good. And I think he can come out and be really good. So I think this comes down to turnovers and explosive plays. And while Penn State has been much better at generating explosives this year, most of them have been to tight end Tyler Warren. And I think Ohio State is going to double team Warren a lot, and they're going to dare Penn State to beat them with anybody else. And I just don't think Penn State's good enough at receiver to exploit this Buckeye secondary consistently. So I think it's going to be ugly. I think both defenses force turnovers. I think both QBs look frazzled at times, regardless of who plays for Penn State, by the pressure in their faces from these fantastic defensive lines. I think JT Tuimalu for Ohio State has some fun too. And this is a physical, in-your-face, Big Ten kind of football game. I just don't think we're going to see the offensive pyrotechnics we usually see from these teams. So I've got Ohio State 27, Penn State 20. And I think Penn State probably scores late. So I'm with you in that it's going to be a one-score game, but not really feel like a one-score game. You know?
Oh, yeah.
So So you had 31-17. I feel like that, but I just think Penn State's going to find a way to punch one in at some point. And there's going to be Ohio State's going to have at least have one possession where they have to do something with the ball and make sure Penn State doesn't have a chance to tie.
It could happen, and that late score that can always fiddle with the margin. But I think Ohio State's too good.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just think the Buckeyes. This is a Buckeyes team that was made to win a national title. I cannot believe that they're going to be on the outside looking into the playoff with a loss here. I just can't believe they're going to do that. I think Ryan Day is too good a coach. And also, let's be real. What's James Franklin's record in big games against top teams?
I have heard Ryan Day described as the Nick Saban of James Franklin's. And I'll take the Nick Saban of James Franklin's over the James Franklin of James Franklin's.
That's good. I like that. I like that a lot. The Nick Saban of James Franklin's. That's funny. All right. So that's going to be a great game. I can't wait to watch that, except for I'm not going to be able to watch it in real time, because in real time, I'm going to be watching 5-3 Minnesota Golden Gophers, who are going to visit the 6-2 number 24 Illinois Illini. This is an 11 a.m. game on FS1. The line is Minnesota by 3, which I've heard some pundits were a little surprised. I wasn't that surprised by the line because I watched both these teams really closely, but I thought a lot of people were surprised about that line. So that's interesting to me. Anyway, Illinois has been real good this year, really good this year under Bielema. Their 2 losses are to teams ranked 1st and 3rd in the nation, respectively. Oregon is the only game where they truly got blown out, as their defense was able to hang with Penn State, even if their offense could not. This is an atypical Brett Bielema team. They rely on a salty defense and the arm of Luke Altmaier. Altmaier has quietly been very solid as a Big Ten QB. For the year, he's completing 63% of his passes for 7.7 yards per attempt, 15 TDs to just 3 interceptions. And they've needed all that production because the run game just hasn't been there like it usually is. These are 2 very similar teams, in my opinion. Again, so why do I say that? Minnesota under PJ Fleck is usually a run-first team. But this year, they have relied on the arm of QB Max Brosmer and the passing game, along with a great defense that currently ranks 12th in the country in scoring defense, giving up just under 17 points per game. That's pretty impressive stuff. Also worth noting, QB Max Brosmer is completing a wildly impressive 70% of his passes, 7.3 yards per attempt, 12 TDs to just 4 picks. Both teams have 2 receivers they really like. Illinois has Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant, and Minnesota has Daniel Jackson and Elijah Spencer. Worth noting that Pat Bryant got what appeared to be a concussion against Oregon. It did not look good, but Brett Bielema has already said that he's going to play. So that's something to monitor, because when guys come back from concussions too quickly, I feel like they're more likely to get another concussion. And that's a quick turnaround to play in a week after getting a concussion. I think, just off the top of my head, I feel like when Gopher players have gotten concussions, it's been like 2 to 4 weeks generally.
Yeah, you don't want to take any chances with that. And usually they get held out, but
yeah,
we'll see.
But Bielema's pretty old school, so I'm actually not that surprised that he'd be like, oh yeah, they're going to play. They'll be fine. It'll be good. Whatever. Illinois is giving up closer to 21 points per game, but it's also fair to remark that Illinois played Oregon. So these teams are very close defensively. These are both very good defensive teams. I think there's a reason why the line is as close as it is. I think it's because it's 2 very similar teams in a really winnable game for either squad. So Dom, what are your thoughts on this one?
So I think you're right. I think these are very comparable teams. This for me is kind of who's at the top of sort of the second tier of the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Right. Behind the 1 loss and undefeated teams. This is really that next level. I feel like Illinois has never really been able to legitimize their place in the top 25. They keep hanging on the back there. They got to win over a really good Nebraska team.
Yes.
I just would like to point out
impressive win.
That's a really good Nebraska team. They were not a really good Nebraska team when Indiana beat them, but ever since, I think they've been quite good. But I think these are comparable teams, so I'm looking at comparable games. If I'm looking at comparable games that these 2 teams have played, I see things like Minnesota losing to North Carolina with the fireworks going off on the missed field goal.
Yeah.
Right? I'm seeing Illinois manhandle Kansas. Right? I'm seeing Illinois beat Michigan. I'm seeing Minnesota lose to Michigan. But then I look at the calendar. With the exception of that Michigan game, ever since we flipped over to October, Illinois looked a little more shaky. They should have lost to Purdue. I was at my sister and brother-in-law's house in West Lafayette part of that afternoon. Purdue looked like the better team. And
they had them.
The only other game where that's true was against Indiana State.
Right.
And then we look at Minnesota. Right. You already know the answer to this, Mike, I'm sure. But Max Brosmer's thrown 4 interceptions this year. Just 4. How many of them were in October? None. The Gophers are figuring some things out. And Illinois is trying to hold on to their footing. Right? I think, unless those Red Grange uniforms are coming back, and I don't think they are, I think Minnesota can win a close one. I've seen some dramatic games in Illinois Memorial Stadium. I almost got thrown out of the press box there once when I was doing student radio at IU.
I bet that's a great story.
I may have been cheering. I was
sure.
I was a color commentator. I was not a play-by-play commentator for that game. Right. But they came storming down. The assistant athletic director for Indiana came storming down the press box, telling me to clam up as Indiana was driving down for a game-winning drive. But I think that environment, right, is not an oppressive home field advantage. Right, Bielema even kind of called out the Illinois crowd in one of their recent games, right? Saying, well, do that every time.
Implying they sold out a game finally. And then
implying that they don't.
Yeah. Right? Basketball school, for sure.
I know a thing or two about that. I think Minnesota, in a battle of comparable teams, is the team playing better at the right time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there'll be no shock that I do agree with you. I think this game is as close to a coin flip as you can get generally, but the rumors are that Illinois is a little banged up in the secondary. And it's not totally clear who's going to play and who's not going to play. I will be curious to see if any starters miss time for Illinois. If so, that could be a big boon to this Minnesota passing attack. Illinois is tough, very good, and they will be tough. Brett Bielema is an extremely underrated coach. But the Gophers are on a roll. They've looked better and better every week. They eviscerated Maryland last week in a game that wasn't near even as close as the score was. It was 48-10 before PJ called off the dogs, And then Mike Loxley scored a couple late touchdowns to make it look, make it 25 points instead of 38, So great. Bielema's going to have something in this game. I don't know what it is. It's going to be a fake punt. It's going to be something on special teams. It's going to be some kind of double reverse flea flicker, some kind of thing. And whether or not he hits on that, might be a momentum thing early in the game. I just feel it. I feel Brett Bielema. I've watched him coach enough games. He's going to pull something. He's going to pull something big out and try to make some hay at some point. The Gophers, though, man, Dom, I got to tell you, I have never in my life, I'm not going to say he's straight up the best quarterback Minnesota's ever had at this point, because, it was a growing for Max Brosmer. It was a growing experience for him to go from the FCS to the Big Ten. And it took him, the month of September, really, to figure it out. And then in the second half of that Michigan game, something clicked. And ever since then, he has just been on an outrageous heater. And I still think that, Minnesota has Darius Taylor. And even though they haven't run the ball that well this year, Darius Taylor's been been devastating in the passing game. So when they can't get him, they'll run him. But when they can't get him going running the ball, they throw it to him. And it works about as well because he can still make guys miss in space. And that's the main thing. Bielema does not have a go-to running back like that. That's the point I'm making. It was supposed to be Caden Fagan. He got hurt. He's out. And the backups are not on that level. So I do think Minnesota has an advantage at running back. I think receivers are close with Illinois maybe having a slight edge. But I like Max Brosmer more than I like Luke Allmeyer. Straight up. And I just think he's playing at a higher level. And I think that's the difference in what's going to be a really close, entertaining game that's probably going to take years off my life. So, Dom, I'll ask you first. What do you have for a score?
The line's 3.
Yep.
I think it's a 3-point game. I'm going to take Minnesota 24, Illinois 21.
Wow. Well, it's funny we did this, but you are kind of John. John does this with me all the time. I thought it was just us, but I have the Minnesota Golden Gophers 24, the Illinois Illini 20. So I think it's 1 point, but I could, obviously we're seeing pretty much the same sort of game. So that will be an interesting one to watch. And now let's move on to another 11 a.m. game. We've got the 3-5 Northwestern Wildcats going to West Lafayette to take on the 1-6 Purdue Boilermakers. It's an 11 a.m. game on the Big Ten Network. The line is Northwestern by 1. So this is a game between two programs who are really struggling in year 2 of their respective rebuilds under new coaches. Northwestern has been good defensively, but the offense has been abysmal. They got virtually no production last week against Iowa, and when you put a defense out there over and over again, eventually they wear down. You need your offense to possess the ball and move the ball to give the defense a rest during the game. So Northwestern flat out hasn't been able to do this year, no matter who's playing QB. But at least Northwestern has a defense. Because despite the fact that Ryan Walters is a defensive coach, the defense at Purdue this year has been atrocious. It didn't help losing all-world defensive end Nick Scorton in the transfer portal, but they just haven't played well in his absence. And the one game for Purdue that the offense showed up in Big Ten play, the defense gave up 50 to Illinois. So at least we've seen the Purdue offense spark once during conference play. I will say that. But Purdue giving up 38.5 points per game. Woof. That puts Purdue 129th out of 133 FBS teams in scoring defense. And that is a recipe to lose a lot of games, and that's why Purdue is 1-6. So Dom, how are you seeing this one play out?
I think we can reasonably say that this is a game both teams have circled.
Oh, yeah.
Look at remaining schedules for both teams. Purdue has Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, at Indiana.
Ooh.
Northwestern has Ohio State, Michigan, Illinois. Now, I think they've got it circled for different reasons. I think Purdue is thinking, if they're being honest with themselves, this is our last shot for a win.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Northwestern, on the other hand, may be saying, we win this one here. Michigan's looked beatable.
Oh, Michigan's super beatable.
Illinois almost lost to Purdue. They could be on a bit of a slide going into that last game of the year. Northwestern may be thinking, hey, we win this one here. We got something to sell going along with last year's 8-win campaign.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Purdue has said they're going to play both quarterbacks in this game.
Which is really interesting.
Ryan Brown. Purdue is coming off of a bye week when they've had some time to figure out what they might do with both of those quarterbacks. Now, the old adage goes, if you got 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. But Michigan made it work last week.
Yeah.
When Purdue sprung Ryan Brown on Illinois, they almost won the thing.
Yeah, the Illini were not ready for that.
Coulda, shoulda done it.
Yeah.
And if it sounds like I'm trying to talk myself into the Boilers, I kind of am.
Sure.
Because Northwestern's given me nothing to believe in other than what feels like a flash in the pan game against Maryland.
Yeah.
Jack Lausch looked real good against Indiana. Bryce Kurtz caught 1 billion balls. Haven't really seen Bryce Kurtz since.
No. It's on a milk carton.
I think I'll take the team coming off the bye. I think that Purdue's going to be able to score just enough with just enough weird stuff to make this a game. And I think they pull it out.
Interesting. What's your score?
I'll take Purdue 31, Northwestern 27.
Okay. All right. I like that. That's good. I like upsets. I don't have much confidence in this pick because I don't have confidence in either one of these teams. But I do think that the Northwestern's defense is the best unit in this game. And I do think that David Braun is the better coach in this game. Both offenses are terrible. I predict an ugly, turnover-heavy game where whichever team scores the most on short fields wins. And I think you're going to see Northwestern force turnovers. I think Brown is... I think if you show him some looks, he could make some mistakes. So, yeah, I've got the Northwestern Wildcats 20, the Purdue Boilermakers 13.
I think if Brown's throwing at all, Purdue's in a world of trouble. They need to do what Michigan did and make that a run package. Him, Maccabee, something like that.
Yeah.
If Brown's throwing, they're in trouble. If Card's throwing, he could be all right.
Hudson Card can play.
He can.
He can. He has his moments for sure. I wonder where Purdue's psyche is right now at 1-6. You know what I mean? At 1-6 with a head coach who's never proven a thing ever, as this is his first head coaching job and it's not going well.
No.
Like, I just wonder where that locker room is and so I guess I kind of hope we see the game you described. That sounds like a more fun game than the game I'm describing. So I hope that's what we get out of it.
If we don't, I think Ryan Walters' chair starts to heat up a little bit.
Do you think they would fire him this year?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't, unless,
because 1-11's rough.
Unless they think they can ramp up the back end support, the NIL stuff, all that. If they think they can do what Indiana did,
right?
And that's not the NIL ramped up because Curt Cignetti came.
No, it was ramped up, and that's why Curt Cignetti came.
Because the NIL ramped up. Yes. If Purdue can do that, if they think in their athletic department that they can do that, then maybe they cut bait.
Sure.
But I grew up in West Lafayette, and I know that they've got a long leash for football coaches that haven't always proven it.
Right.
So I think he's got another year regardless, but he's going to have to start winning some ball games.
Yeah, he absolutely does. So that will be a really interesting game that I will be watching after the fact, because let's be real, I have two screens. The main one's going to be on Minnesota, Illinois, and the other one's going to be on Penn State, Ohio State.
Game of the century of the week.
Exactly. All right, moving right along. We have the 8-0 number 1 Oregon Ducks going to Ann Arbor, take on the 5-3 Michigan Wolverines. This is the 2:30 p.m. game on CBS. Cue the horns. The line is Oregon by 14.5. Dom, I'm out of superlatives to describe Oregon. They are scoring 35 points a game and giving up just 16. They're undefeated. They slayed the Big Ten's 800-pound gorilla in their win over Ohio State. They flat out embarrassed a good Illinois team just last week. And I believe that Oregon has continued to improve as the year has gone on. Ducks QB Dylan Gabriel is putting together a season for the ages, completing 76% of his passes. Yeah, Heisman pose indeed. 76% of his passes, that'll play with Heisman voters if you keep winning. They can run the ball with Jordan James. They have a plethora of dangerous receivers in Johnson, Stewart, and Holden, and Ferguson's a good tight end. And the defense has been sneakily improving as the year goes on. And when Jordan Birch gets back, oh man, it's gonna be wild. So I'm just not sure what the weakness is on this Oregon team. By contrast, Michigan has a good but not great defense, pretty good special teams, and an offense that looked better under Davis Warren against Sparty than it has all year, to be fair. That said, Warren still didn't do all that much. And to convince me Michigan has a shot in this game, they have to score with Oregon. So I think that the only way I see that happening is if Michigan significantly wins the turnover battle. If they did that, find a way to win with special teams and defense, maybe they can keep it. I don't know. I'm trying really hard to talk myself into Michigan making this a game, Dom, but I'm having a hard time.
Yeah, they'd have to muck it up. Because Oregon has booked a first-class one-way ticket to Indianapolis for the Big Ten title game, and that train is rolling down the tracks. This is the upset of all upsets if Michigan pulls it.
Oh, yeah.
And if this game is even close, look for the it's impossible to travel 4 time zones argument to start ramping up again.
Right.
But I want to go back to something you said on the solo pod for the review. You said, does making a bowl game save Sharon Moore's job? Right? I don't think Sharon Moore's job needs saving.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I think he gets. I think he has one because of the timing.
Sure.
Of when Harbaugh left, they didn't have time to go out and portal a bunch of players. They didn't have time. That's what they'll say.
That's what they'll say. Yeah.
That's what they'll say. I think he has another year. And I think a win over Oregon, while it may not lock his job down for years to come, would certainly cover a multitude of sins. And as a man who knows a thing or two about sins, there have been plenty for this Michigan team this year. If I'm looking at this game, I don't know what more I can say about Oregon. You said it all. We could just do the guys recite ball players thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's Oregon.
Yep.
Right? Since Big Ten play started, right? They had to get their footing against Iowa. Boise State has the greatest threat to Dylan Gabriel's Heisman campaign in Ashton Jennings, right? But since Big Ten play started, Oregon has beaten all non-Ohio State teams by a combined score of 138-32. Ever since the game against Idaho, the fewest points Oregon has scored is 31 against Michigan State. Michigan, on the other hand, has been up and down all year. They've played every quarterback on the roster practically, and one of them just retired.
Yep. And we wish Jack Tuttle the best.
Absolutely. I have great love in my heart for Jack Tuttle. The Wisconsin win for Indiana during the COVID year. And enough words cannot be said about how gutty of a performance Jack Tuttle had in that year's bowl game against Mississippi, because he was playing on a banged up shoulder. And that game is closer than a lot of Hoosier fans remember it was. We lost bowl games at Indiana. What can I say? Maybe the brightest spot for Michigan all season, right? And this is a contrast with Oregon, was their 30-10 win over Fresno State back in August. The same week that Oregon was trying to get out of first gear against Idaho.
Right.
People forget, though, Fresno was in position to make that game interesting when Will Johnson picked Mikey Keene off with 3 seconds left to steal the game.
Yep.
Michigan is a mess at quarterback. Their leading rusher is not Donovan Edwards. And their leading receiver is a tight end, Colston Loveland. I don't think you can look at this game objectively and say anything other than Ducks by a billion. And the only way it's not that is if Michigan mucks it up. And I think Oregon's too good to get mucked up by Michigan.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the party rolls on for Oregon with a solid win. And I just think Oregon set this really high bar, and they keep setting it higher and higher every week. And Michigan, they don't have flat out don't have the weapons. And their best player is a tight end, but he's not the best tight end in the Big Ten. That's Tyler Warren. And I know people will be like, Colston Loveland's going to be a higher draft pick. I'm not talking about draft pick. I don't care about the NFL. I'm talking about right now on Saturday. What are you going to do? Tyler Warren can carry a passing offense. Colston Loveland is a very good player, but he cannot carry your offense on his shoulders. He just can't.
Well, no. And one of them has Dylan Gabriel throwing to him.
Yeah.
And one of them has Alex Orji in running situations. Like, you can't get that rhythm when you're changing out quarterbacks all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. So I do think, though, maybe that I think Michigan makes it interesting for a while. for like a quarter and a half. Maybe they have like a very good scripted series, go down and score a touchdown, and then, make it somewhat interesting for a bit. But ultimately, I'm with you. The Oregon Ducks are playing at too high a level, and Michigan, this is the worst Michigan team since Brady Hoke was the coach. Period. So I've got the Oregon Ducks 38, the Michigan Wolverines 17, and I think that Michigan probably scores late to get to 17.
I think the fine folks at CBS would like your game a lot better than mine because I can't see anything other than a rout. Ducks 52, Wolverines 9.
Ooh.
Not close by the middle of the first quarter.
Sure. And I could see that happening very easily. Very easily. If Dylan Gabriel comes out, if the Ducks get ahead, like if they get ahead 2 scores, it's over because Michigan can't come back, right? So Michigan's only chance is to get off to a hot start and play defense at a higher level than they've played this year. And if Ohio State couldn't stop Oregon, I don't think Michigan can stop Oregon.
Not a chance.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we have the 8-0, number 13, Indiana Hoosiers going to East Lansing to take on the 4-4 Michigan State Spartans. This is a 2:30 p.m. game on Peacock. And I just have to say, as I always do, that I hate Peacock. The production value is terrible. The app sucks. You can't fast forward and rewind in anything like a reasonable fashion. So I'm trying to go back through these games, and it's like you have to skip 10 seconds at a time, but like it takes forever to skip, and it's awful. It is awful, Peacock, and I hate you. So the line is Indiana by 7.5. Star Hoosier QB Curtis Rourke is expected to play. That's good news. That said, Navy's QB just tried to play with a wrap thumb, and he had 1 million turnovers seemingly against Notre Dame. Now, I don't think Curtis Rourke's going to have a bunch of turnovers. That's not my point. But here's my point. I think this game is going to be atypical of Indiana. I think normally Indiana comes out and they want to stretch you horizontally and vertically in the passing game, and they want to get downfield. They want to get their guys in space, and they want to make hay. I don't know if you do that with Curtis Rourke when his thumb is still healing. I think this might be a big day for Justice Ellison at running back. Sparty managed to shut down Caleb Johnson for Iowa, but Iowa doesn't have a passing attack like Indiana does. In fact, Iowa doesn't have a passing attack at all. So I don't think Sparty's going to be able to cheat guys into the box all game the way they did against Iowa. The Hoosiers are just too dynamic in the passing game for that. I'm going to be really interested to see if the Signetti staff finds creative ways to get Elijah Surratt the ball without forcing Rourke to throw it downfield a ton. I'm thinking like pop fat passes, screens, like maybe a reverse or something, like something that's going on to make it so Rourke early in the game doesn't have to throw the ball a bunch downfield, and you can still manufacture some points, get a lead, and then run the ball a little bit. So to be fair to Michigan State, Sparty's probably the most explosive offense Indiana's faced this year. Aiden Childs has flashes of greatness in his play at QB for Michigan State, but he's far from a finished product and still makes a lot of mistakes in the form of interceptions. Michigan State needs a big game from Nick Marshall at wide receiver. They need a big game from Nick Carter at running back if they're going to have a chance. They have to avoid mistakes. They have to keep Indiana's offense off the field. I'm thinking if you're Michigan State, when you complete a pass or after a running play, that you're probably running that clock down to like 3 and snapping the ball and just taking the air out of the ball, trying to limit possessions, shorten the game, and do something to combat this, do something to keep away from this awesome Hoosiers offense. So, Dom, how do you see your undefeated Hoosiers playing in this one?
Yeah, I like what you said about creative ways to get the ball to wide receivers. I think the creative wide receiver you want to get the ball to is Miles Price.
Okay.
Rather than Elijah Surratt. I think Surratt.
I just think Surratt can do anything at this point.
Oh, he absolutely can. The Waffle House is open 24/7.
Right.
You are never going to take him fully out of a game. But I think the best play that Surratt has with Rourke is that slant RPO, right? Where you pull in the linebacker on the run option, you come across, it's a 5-yard pass, right? And Curtis Rourke can throw that with a wrapped thumb.
Absolutely.
But I want to come back to what this game means. Because Indiana-Michigan State is a trophy game. And it's a trophy game I think they need to discontinue. Because these guys have been playing for the old brass spittoon since 1950. And before they started playing for the old brass spittoon, Indiana had never lost to Michigan State.
Okay.
Ever since they started playing for the spittoon, the Spartans lead the series 50-15-1.
Oh, wow.
So I love the
old brass. You don't
brass.
like the spittoon?
I love it. I just think
it
needs. I love it. I just never see it. Right? It's like your aunt that lives across the country. They're great. They're fun. You just never see them.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be discontinued so that Indiana can start winning again in this series. But one thing that's interesting, the last 4 games in this series have all been won by the road team.
Interesting.
All been won by the road team.
Huh.
And this game, if Indiana can win it, gets them to 9 wins for only the 3rd time in school history.
Wow.
Michigan State has to be looking at their schedule at the end of the year and going, if we pull this upset, we can start running downhill, insert ourselves into that Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota sort of second tier of the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
Right? As you said, every indication says Curtis Rourke's going to play. With Jackson last week, Indiana's offense was fine. With Curtis Rourke, Indiana's offense is inevitable. Aside from the weirdo 6 field goal game that Michigan State played against Iowa, Aiden Childs and friends really haven't shown the ability to score the number of points you need to score to beat the Hoosiers. At the same time, Aiden Childs can kind of move.
Oh, yeah.
And Jack Lausch, who can kind of move for the Northwestern Wildcats, is the quarterback that's given Indiana the biggest problems all year. And when they did score in the aforementioned weirdo 6 field goal game against Iowa, Childs ran for 51 yards. I'm getting Northwestern vibes from this one as an Indiana fan. It makes me a little nervous.
Sure.
I don't think that Indiana's going to lose. I think they'll draw up some offense. The second touchdown against Nebraska that Indiana scored was a triple option RPO. Right? So there was an inside run option. Rourke had a keep option. And the third option was a flare pass to Miles Price.
Sure.
And that worked perfectly. I haven't seen a lot of that triple from Indiana. I think you'll see more of that. More of that, where do we find space? On the outside, on the inside. Rather than trying to throw the ball downfield, which we know Rourke can do. Right? But I don't think that we're going to see Cignetti and Shanahan and Tino Sunseri really push on that in this game.
No. I don't think they need to.
The Spartan defense is good. But I don't think Michigan State's offense can keep up with Indiana's potent offensive attack. I think Indiana runs the ball really well. They got a little one-dimensional in the last game against Washington. Justice Ellison got the ball a ton because Tyson Lawton picked up a little knock. They say he's fine, but he didn't really want to go anymore. They kept feeding the ball to Ellison. And Indiana can run. The offensive line is going to keep whoever's back there at quarterback. I think it'll be Rourke all game. They'll keep them clean. If you can do that, if you're Indiana, there's going to come a point when all of a sudden you're up by 2 scores. And if Michigan State is trying to take the air out of the ball to win this game, Indiana could do that just as much. When Indiana starts to get up, they start to deflate the ball. right? They ran out the last 6 minutes of the Washington game.
Right.
I think Superfan Sherry may be biting her nails as this game goes into the fourth quarter, but I think Indiana's going to pull away and handle this one, and we can all break out the 9 Windiana apparel that we've had gathering dust in our closets for 5 years because it's finally going to happen.
Nice. Yeah, I think that nobody's stopped Indiana all year. So is Sparty going to be the first? I just doubt it. And here's the thing. You make a good point. The thing about Joe Rossi defenses, and I know a lot about Joe Rossi because I spent several years with him, is that he doesn't want to blitz, like almost ever. He wants to make the offense make mistakes. And in college football, that can be a really good strategy. So he will give up a lot of yards between the 20s with the idea that they're going to get tough, and either the offense is going to make a mistake and you're going to capitalize off of that, or when it gets into the 20s, they're going to be able to bend but not break. The problem with that is that Indiana has been really efficient, just crazy efficient offensively. One of the most efficient offensive teams really we've ever seen. And I don't think they're going to make a bunch of mistakes. And I think the fact that Curtis Rourke is coming off an injury means they're going to take fewer chances than they normally do. And that's going to play, that I think almost unintentionally that kind of plays against what Michigan State wants to do. So the fact that Indiana has to do that, might have to do that this game, might end up being the perfect way to attack Michigan State anyway. So I think this is really close for a while. I think Aiden Childs does some crazy stuff in this game. I think this is going to be a game where you're like, Aiden Childs, man, next year, he's going to be really good. It's going to look really good, and Indiana fans are going to be a little nervous, and then he's going to throw a pick or something. And then Indiana's going to score, and they're going to put a little distance in there, and that's going to be enough. So I've got the Indiana Hoosiers 34, the Michigan State Spartans 24.
You're halfway right. Final score of this game, Indiana 42, Michigan State 24.
All right, I could see that for sure. We're not quibbling about much. All right. So, yeah, and if the beat rolls on for Indiana, all I'm going to say is if the Hoosiers get to 9-0 and you don't put them in the top 10, you're a coward. I'm saying that for all the AP voters out there. If they are 9-0 and you don't put them in the top 10, you try to do that. I mean, you try to do that with Big Ten teams that aren't brand names in the past. I'm not going to get any specific cases, but rank Indiana in the top 10. They've earned it. They've earned it.
I think a blind resume test, Indiana's a top 10 team again right now.
No, they are absolutely.
Another win. Absolutely. The problem is the soft schedule argument is never going away for Indiana. Right? The fact of the matter is
all you can do is beat the teams you play.
Oh, hey, you're not going to hear any argument from me. But if Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana all go undefeated, guess who gets left out?
Oh, Indiana for sure.
On opponent's record, right? Yeah. If Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana all have one loss, guess who gets left out? It's Indiana again. And I just wonder, where human voters, when confronted with the words Indiana football, are going to fall. And the only thing Indiana can do is keep winning. So keep winning.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? I played enough NCAA football 2002 on my PlayStation 2 to know that the only way you get Indiana into the BCS title game is to go undefeated. Right? And I think the only way you get Indiana into that conversation, that protected playoff seed conversation, is to go undefeated, right? And that's kind of the craziness of the larger conferences this year,
Yeah.
That you oddly have more teams with fewer losses.
Yes.
Because they're dodging each other.
Well, exactly. That's what we get with these oversized leagues because it's football, not basketball. You can't play a million games.
No.
You can only play so many games in football. And with these giant oversized conferences, we're going to continue to have really uneven schedules. And there are going to be years you get the Indiana schedule, and there are going to be years, you get it goes the other way.
And I want to say before we move on, and I don't need to keep beating the Indiana horse, but if you looked at Indiana's schedule before the year, right, or even when it was released last year, you didn't think it was going to be the Indiana schedule.
No. Well, because nobody thought Michigan was going to be this bad.
Well, right. You got both teams from the national title game. Yes, we know Washington lost everyone.
Yes.
Right? But if you're looking at this schedule at this time in 2023,
right,
you're going, oh, Indiana's toast. Right? And now it's a soft schedule, except for one win against a really good Nebraska team.
Yeah. Against a really good Nebraska team that nearly beat Ohio State somehow. So, yeah.
Because they're really good.
No, I know. They're good. I don't like to admit always that Nebraska's good, but they are having a nice year. For sure. All right. What was the last thing I was going to say? Oh, yeah. I've seen last thing on Indiana. Oh, God, we're such an Indiana podcast now. It's so funny. Curtis Rourke needs to be in the top tier conversation for Big Ten Player of the Year. I'm just saying that right now because I don't know if everyone has him there, and they should. Because I personally believe that he's even better than Dillon Gabriel based on what he's accomplished this year.
It goes to the question, right? When you have a Player of the Year award, is it a most valuable player award? Is it a most outstanding player award? Right? I think missing a game is going to work against Rourke.
But if it's just one game, I don't think it hurts him that badly.
I still think if you look out there at the balance of the season, I think people are going to say Dillon Gabriel all day long, and they'd be right to do so. If you're going to take the track that it's most valuable player award, I think the Maple Missile has a little more to say, right? Because we've seen Indiana with Curtis Rourke.
Yeah.
We've seen Indiana with Taven Jackson, right? Hey, Indiana's done fine with Taven Jackson played the second half against Florida International. Indiana did fine, right? Taven Jackson played the second half against Nebraska. Indiana did fine. Now, some of that was Nebraska was trying the Michigan State strategy of taking the air out of the ball and spent 7.5 minutes driving down the field at the beginning of the third quarter, only to be intercepted and have the whole tide of the game turn.
Right.
Right. But Taven Jackson looked fine against Nebraska. We saw Taven Jackson get thrown to a very good Steve Belichick defense against Washington, who threw out every tendency that they'd had coming off their bye week. By the way, Indiana's last 3 opponents have all been coming off bye weeks.
That's wild.
Right. And Cignetti even said this in his post-game comments. Washington had been a man defense team. They'd played man. And they came out against Indiana and played zone.
Sure.
Right? And that mucked things up. Said he had to throw out about half the game plan.
Right.
Right? So again, like I said, with Taven Jackson, the Indiana offense has been fine. With Curtis Rourke, the Indiana offense is, I used the word, inevitable.
Yeah.
That team is going to score. You have to score 40 points to beat Indiana.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are teams that can do it.
For sure.
I don't think Indiana is going to be undefeated national champions. I'm too much of an Indiana fan to say that. Right? I have been snake bit too many times. Someone out there is going to be able to do it. But I don't think it's Michigan State.
No, I don't think so either. Did you gave a score, right? Or did you?
I did 42-24.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Because you said I should have. All right. Now
we're halfway there.
Yes. Right on. All right. Moving on to the next game. We have the 2-5 UCLA Bruins going to Lincoln to take on the 5-3 Nebraska Cornhuskers. This is a 2:30 p.m. game on the Big Ten Network. The line is Nebraska by 6.5. So I'm just going to say right off the bat, Nebraska had better be ready for this game because UCLA, despite its record, has gotten better as the year has progressed. They jumped up and got Rutgers a few weeks ago. You can't take them for granted. They have Big Ten quality players on both sides of the ball. They can do some things. UCLA's skill players have been really inconsistent, but when QB Ethan Garbers has been good, he's been really good. And he's had those moments throughout the season. That said, Nebraska has a very good defense led by defensive tackle Nash Hutmacher. Matt Rule, in my opinion, is going to want to get a lead in this game and sit on it in this one. I think Nebraska is going to try to score early and then run the ball a ton if they've got a lead. We saw Rule do that against Colorado. I think if they get a lead and they feel like their defense is playing pretty well, I think Matt Rule, it's so funny because Matt Rule basically is PJ Fleck in so many ways. And the Nebraska fans can't see it. They can't see it, and they hate when you say it, but he does all the slogans. He has the same weird late game conservative tendencies and like all the thing. So with a Frosh QB, I think Rule wants to be careful with leads. So it'll be up to UCLA to get off to a fast start so that Nebraska can't run the clock out due to a game script where they're ahead the whole game. So I think if UCLA is going to have a chance in this one, they have to score 10 to 14 points in the first quarter, get ahead, and then put Nebraska in a position they don't want to be in. Because Nebraska doesn't want to come from behind. We saw against Indiana, if Nebraska gets down by enough, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So they have to be in a game. They're kind of like Michigan that way. They kind of have to be in a game to be in a game. So, yeah, I think a lot of things have to go right for UCLA to make this happen. I'm not sure if they will. Dom, how do you see this one going?
So what went right for UCLA in getting their first win since week one? What went right in that Rutgers game? Well, if you listened to the We Live for Saturday Week 8 review, you know that it was Ethan Garbers throwing the ball all over the yard. Nebraska is allowing 204 pass yards per game. And in case UCLA looked at that number and decided they were going to try and run their way to the W, the Black Shirts are allowing just 98 rush yards per game.
Yep.
And that's counting the 215 that Indiana ran for. I don't see how UCLA manages it unless Nebraska doesn't have it in them to bounce back for a second week in a row. I think Matt Rule is a good coach. I think Matt Rule is a good motivator. I love your comparison with PJ Fleck because I have been a huge PJ Fleck fan ever since I thought Indiana should have hired him in the cycle when Minnesota got him.
Right.
I love PJ. I think he's great. I think that stuff motivates people. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Rule can do it. I think that the 958th sellout in a row at Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, or whatever the number is by now, is going to be enough to give Nebraska enough of a push to get on the board early. If you get on the board early, Matt Rule run that game right into the ground. I don't think UCLA will be able to manage enough heat on offense against a very good Nebraska defense.
Extremely good, yeah.
If Ohio State couldn't do it, I don't think UCLA is going to do it. And if we're honest, right, Nebraska's defense wasn't even that bad in their 49-point loss to Indiana. Just that Indiana had some special teams. Indiana had some defensive plays. Right? Indiana outscored Nebraska 14-0 in the third quarter of that game. Nebraska outgained Indiana by 1 billion.
Right.
The defense wasn't bad. They were just put in bad spots. Right. And then by that point, the game's done. right? I think that game was over mid-third quarter after the interception, the 25-yard touchdown drive when Taven Jackson comes into the game. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think Nebraska's defense was that bad.
Right.
Even in a bad game.
Sure.
I think that UCLA is not going to be able to manage anything. I think that Garbers is going to have defensive linemen in his face.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to have anywhere to throw to. And I think Nebraska's going to take the air out of it. They're going to get up, and it's going to be over.
Yeah. I mean, you make a strong case. The problem with UCLA is that they haven't run the ball at all year. So you can just tee off in them in the pass rush. And while Nebraska hasn't always been great in the pass rush, they have their moments for sure. And while Nash Hutmacher hasn't been quite as dominant as he was last year, he's still a force to be dealt with. So, yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think, I really want this to be a fun game, but I don't think it's going to be that great. I don't think Nebraska's going to go crazy on offense or anything, but I think when the smoke clears, I've got the Nebraska Cornhuskers 24, the UCLA Bruins 14.
You're halfway right.
Again.
The final score of this game, Nebraska 24, UCLA 10.
10. Okay. So we're not too far apart.
No.
2-score game either way. All right. Moving on. I've got a game where I'm going to be rooting for the Meteor. We've got the 5-3 Wisconsin Badgers going to Iowa City, going to Kinnick to take on the 5-3 Iowa Hawkeyes. This is the 6:30 p.m. game on NBC, or as I like to call it now, the Here Comes Saturday Night game. The line is Iowa by 3. So this game's a lot more interesting now than it looked a month ago. And that's because the Wisconsin defense and running game have gotten better in the last month after a really shaky start to the year. Wisconsin got 3 consecutive wins over the dregs of the league in Purdue, Northwestern, and Rutgers before playing Penn State tough to the tune of a 10-7 halftime lead. However, Penn State dominated the second half en route to a 28-13 victory. Wisconsin's offense went absolutely nowhere that whole second half, as has been the case too often this season. Rumors abound, according to contributor and former guest host Scooby, that OC Phil Longo will be gone after this season is over. And I have to wonder if those rumors are impacting the Badgers on the field. The more straightforward answer is that the QB and wide receiver play has just not been good enough. And because of that, good defenses can stop Wisconsin solely by stopping the running game. So can Wisconsin get some more juice out of the air part of the air raid offense? I think they're going to have to, because this Iowa D is no slouch. And if Wisconsin is one-dimensional, I'm not sure how well things are going to work. As for Iowa, Caleb Johnson wasn't enough to defeat Michigan State as Sparty shut down the running game and forced Iowa to do something it can't do, which is pass the ball with Cade McNamara. During the last game, however, McNamara got benched for throwing a pick, and Brendan Sullivan came on and tried to provide a jolt to the offense. He only passed for 79 yards, though. Maybe he can do more than McNamara could if given a full game, but again, who's he throwing to? So against this improving Wisconsin D, will Iowa be able to get away with just running Caleb Johnson, who is still averaging nearly 8 yards a carry this far into the season, which is bananas? Or will they have to throw the ball to open up the run? That, to me, is the defining question of this game. So if Caleb Johnson can get loose, Iowa can win on his efforts alone. Absolutely. We've seen him do it over and over this season. But if Wisconsin can shut down the run at all, it'll be up to Sullivan to show more than Iowa has shown all season in the passing game. So no pressure, Brendan. So, Dom, how are you seeing a game between my two hated rivals playing out?
I think the clock's going to be running a lot during this game because I think we know what both teams want to do. We know what Iowa wants to do. They want to run. They want to get you off the field fast on defense. And in Wisconsin's wins against Rutgers and Northwestern, that's what they did too. And they also beat Purdue. And if you ignore what I said about Purdue earlier when I picked them to win, just remember that they're a bad team. How the Badgers won that game with almost 360 passing yards matters a lot less. What I'm saying here is I think both teams are going to try and do the same general thing. I think Iowa does it better. I don't care if Brendan Sullivan is starting for the Hawkeyes because I think Brendan Sullivan, more than Cade McNamara, knows what his job is. His job is to turn around and hand the ball to Caleb Johnson. And Caleb Johnson will Caleb Johnson. Wisconsin's rush defense is not that great. 67th nationally in yards per game against. I think that Iowa is going to have more of their way in this game than Wisconsin will. And I think NBC is going to be looking for chances to run commercials because this game is going to be over quick on the clock. Now, I like what you I don't like what you said about Phil Longo, but it makes a lot of sense too. Because Luke Fickell has not been winning a lot of games at Wisconsin.
Not like he was expected to.
And it's sort of the classic defensive head coach move.
Mm-hmm.
Get rid of the offensive coordinator and buy yourself a year. And that's, I think, where the Badgers are going to be. Because, frankly, the rest of this season, it's Oregon next. And if Wisconsin goes into their game at Nebraska, having lost 3 in a row, they're going to start having some questions up in Madison. For
Absolutely.
Iowa, this might be the most losable game they've got left, either this or Nebraska.
Right.
And winning this goes a long way into putting them into that top of the second tier of the Big Ten conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is similar, if at a lower level, than what I was saying about Penn State and Ohio State. These teams are pretty much the same. They're trying to do the same things. I think Iowa does them better. I'm going to take the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I agree with you on most of those points. I don't think either team runs the ball well in the first half in this game. I think it's going to be crazy ugly. I think it's going to be really low scoring. I think people are going to be, bored because it's just not going to be very compelling for a while. But Caleb Johnson's one of the best backs in the country. I mean, I would argue that other than Ashton Genty, I don't think anybody's better than Caleb Johnson. I don't think he takes a second. Yeah, I don't think he takes second billing to anybody. Tawi Walker is a good back for Wisconsin, but he's not a great back. He is an average to slightly above average Big Ten running back, which is fine, which is good, which is like good enough to play and get some stuff done, but he's just not on Johnson's level. And this is a rivalry where the team with the best running game wins. That's how it's been as far as I can remember. So give me Iowa. I've got the Iowa Hawkeyes 20, the Wisconsin Badgers 13. And I'm going to say that Iowa at some point has either a pick six or a punt return of like 40 plus yards.
I think you're right about Iowa causing some havoc, scoring some points outside of the offense. I think Caleb Johnson is good enough for 2 touchdowns on his own. I think Kirk Ferentz likes to kick field goals. I'm going to take Iowa 27, Wisconsin 13.
All right. Right on. Well, Dom, we have made it to the last game. Or no, we made it to the last game. And this next one features 2 teams who are pretty desperate, I would say, at this point in the season. I would describe them both as desperate. We have the 4-4 USC Trojans at the 4-4 Washington Huskies. This is a 6:30 p.m. game on Big Ten Network. The line is USC by 2.5. So both teams desperately need this win if they're going to make a bowl game. USC still has to play Nebraska and Notre Dame, while Washington still has to play Penn State and Oregon. Oof. So the loser of this game is in serious danger of missing a bowl game. So I expect both teams to empty the clip and unload the kitchen sink in this game. Expect trick plays from both sides, other kinds of deception. I think both teams will be desperate to get off to a good start. Will Rogers and Jonah Coleman could not keep up with Indiana, even with a backup QB taking snaps. It worries me that Washington only scored 17 points in their last game. By contrast, USC broke its 3-game losing streak by pounding a hapless Rutgers squad. So how does this play out, Dom? What are you thinking about?
I think these teams have taken very different paths to 4-4. Right? Yeah. I think Washington, if they sat down and they were honest with themselves after losing their entire starting lineup from last year's national championship runner-up team, would say, hey, we're going to need to rebuild, not just reload, especially when former Indiana offensive coordinator Kalen DeBoer goes down to Alabama.
Yeah.
That said, USC, especially after starting out the year with a big win against LSU.
A huge win. And they looked good doing it.
They looked great doing it. Probably thought, hey, this year, this Big Ten thing, this might be for us. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing. I don't know that they were wrong. The Trojans' 4 losses have come by a combined 14 points.
Sure.
And they'll want to prove that they're the team that beat LSU, not the team that lost to Maryland. I still believe in Miller Moss.
Absolutely.
I think Woody Marks is a top half Big Ten running back.
Yeah.
I don't know what Washington's got that can keep up with the Trojans. And looking down the barrel of Penn State and Oregon, Washington's got to be worried about what this means for the rest of the season.
Oh, yeah.
Both teams like to throw the ball. They're both top 25 in the nation for passing yards. USC's just that much better. I don't think the Huskies are going to be able to hang. USC can score in bunches. Again, Indiana has a decent defense, right? I love this Indiana defense. But it's not an all-world defense. Washington only scored 17.
Yeah. That worries me a lot too.
You look at the common opponents, right? Yeah, Washington beat Michigan. USC lost to Michigan. I don't know what to make of Michigan, so I'm going to throw all Michigan games out.
Yeah.
There's also Rutgers. Washington lost that one close. USC won that one big.
Big.
Real big. And with that in mind, I'm going to trust the Trojans. I don't love it. Because Washington, I think, is a good team. But I think USC can be a great team on any given night. I think both teams are going to score. But I think it's USC that comes away making a push for the postseason and saying we'll get them next year. Whereas Washington is going to have to look at what it means to go 5-7. Yeah. Maybe even 4-8.
Yeah.
With an improving UCLA team still on the schedule. And what does it mean to build back up from that in the new world of this new Big Ten?
And I promised our friend 8@89 Windy City on Twitter that we wouldn't make any more Jedfish to Florida references. So we're going to put that to the side and assume that he's staying. Yes, it's going to be a rebuild. It was always going to be a rebuild, in my opinion, with what they lost. So I agree with you about that. If, let's say, hypothetically, if Washington was going to be in this game, I think what they could need and what they could get is a huge game from Jonah Coleman, because USC has been bad against the run, flat out bad. And teams that run the ball well and have enough of a passing attack to keep USC honest have moved the ball consistently on this USC defense. So I think that Washington, I also think Washington this is a circle the wagons, desperation, trying to make a bowl thing. So I do think we're going to see Jedfish's best game here. I think Washington's going to play better than they played last week against Indiana. But again, Miller Moss is Miller Moss. And USC may have found something in receiver Makai Lemon. He really broke out last week, and he could be a guy that they could, I think early in the season, I thought it was going to be Zachariah Branch or maybe somebody else, but maybe Makai Lemon becomes the top target in the USC receiving room. So Washington has a good defense. I think a good enough defense anyway. I think this will be close. I think USC is going to play with its food a little bit. So I think my final score is USC Trojans 31, the Washington Huskies 27.
Stop me if you've heard this before, Mike, but you're half right.
Okay.
Southern California 35, Washington 27.
All right. So yeah, one score game. I think USC is going to look like they have a chance to blow this open, but they're going to do what USC does and make enough mistakes to keep Washington in the game. But I just don't think Washington has the firepower to finish.
I think that Southern California is a more talented team than Washington.
Absolutely.
I think that Washington is going to give this their best shot.
Yes.
And I think their best shot is just not quite good enough.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I am with you. All right. Well, that's all the games, Dom. So thanks so much to our guest host, Dom the Rev. Really appreciate it. It's been awesome, and I'm excited to watch some ball this weekend and come back and talk about it all next week. So thank you for listening. Please subscribe, follow, all that kind of stuff. If you are an audio-only listener, please go to our YouTube page and subscribe to the podcast. It helps get us in front of other people's eyes. And I actually, at the Gopher game last week, I found somebody that I sit next to in the crowd just mentioned that they found my podcast and listen to it all the time.
Fantastic. Also, Google Podcast does not exist. Fix the ad read, John.
I know. We have to adjust that. That's gone now.
To be fair, I now have Podcast Addict because I used to have Google Podcasts, and now I listen on Podcast Addict because I know I can get We Live for Saturday. Awesome. Follow Mike at Alibaba or whatever it is, and I'm Dom the Rev.
That was good. That was a good John impression. And yes, you can follow me at Alibaba26 on Twitter. Please reach out if you want to engage. We are always open to suggestions, critiques. If you want to tell us we're wrong, that's always fun too. And we'll see you next time.